doing? I hope you're well. I'm Deanna and welcome to my channel. Today we have a video that's long overdue. February happened, February's gone and passed. February wasn't a great month for me, just with like life stuff, but we persevered. I didn't have time and or energy to do my January wrap up. So now that it's already March, we are going to do a combined January and February wrap up. Now, I read a lot of books across both of those months, so we will try and keep it as rapid fire as I possibly can. We all know I love to ramble. The main reason why I want to keep this as quick as possible is that across the 2 months I have read 32 books. We'll do the monthly breakdown for stats first. So for January, I read a total of 16 books, which was 6,497 pages. For a ratings breakdown, I gave an average rating of 4.4 stars. So 3 books received 5 stars, 7 4.5 stars, 5 books had 4 stars, and I gave 1 book 3.5 stars. Moving into genres, for January we had a pretty wide variety of genres. So romance was still my top genre with 8 romances read, but I did read 3 Omegaverse books, and then I read 1 each for paranormal, fantasy romance, historical fiction, fantasy, and short stories. So overall, pretty wide selection. In terms of formats, again, pretty mixed. Audiobook is still coming out on top with 7 audiobooks listened to, and then I read 4 arcs. I read 2 paperbacks, 1 hardback, and 2 ebooks. For series versus standalone, I am the most excited and happy and thrilled about this particular pie chart. I read 5 first books, but I read 10 sequels, which is incredible and very much largely thanks to my binge reading series and then also the first episode of my completion chronicles, and then I read 1 standalone. Having a flip over to February, I also read 16 books, and that was for a total page count of 5,423 pages. And in February, I gave a average rating of 4.3 stars. 3 books had 5 stars, 7 books had 4.5 stars, 4 books had 4 stars, and 3 books got 3.5 stars. For genres, it is definitely skewed to kind of my favorite genres. February was Feb, so I was, not surprisingly, reading a lot of fantasy romance. So 9 of the 16 books I read were fantasy romance. I had 4 romances, 2 Omegaverse, and 1 paranormal. In terms of formats, no surprise here, we had 8 audiobooks. Ebooks came in second place with 5. Then I read 2 hardbacks and read an arc, which not great, but I will be trying to pick up my arc reading for March. And then for series versus sequels, we had a very even split. In fact, just dead even. We read 8 first books and we had 8 sequels. So all the progress I made in January gone with February, but that's okay. That's okay. We can still move forward for the rest of the year. Okay, so now we're going on to the books. So in January I did have 2 reading vlogs, so in the interest of keeping this as concise as possible, I will briefly mention the books I read as part of those vlogs, then I'll leave them linked up above and down below so you can hear all my full thoughts. So for my first vlog, which was my ultimate book video for the Romantic Affair convention, I did read The God and the Gumiho by Sophie Kim and the Romantic Affair Anthology. This is a fantasy book with a relatively strong romantic subplot. We are following Kim Hani, who is a Gumiho, which is this kind of like fox demon character in Korean mythology, and Sokja, who is the banished trickster god. He has been banished to this city for attempting to overthrow his brother, the Sun King. He managed to do it and hold on to the crown for like maybe seconds before he was overthrown, so he has been tasked with rounding up as many demons as he had in his army to overthrow the king. And then they bump into each other because Sokya is moonlighting as a police detective and is getting inundated with his workload, and there is an instance of a Gumiho attacking and eating people's livers, which is a big no-no. And then there's fear that the Scarlet Fox, which was this infamous Gumiho who was out and about around the time of Jack the Ripper, so she is working with him in hopes of steering him away from her and her best friend. And it was just so much fun. I love this introduction into Korean folklore for, and very excited for the second book. And then I did read this collection by a few of the authors. So it includes Bindi Kennedy, Lucifer, LJ Sky, Layla Pine, Jay Lynn, EJ Campbell, and MK Vindictive. And I had so much fun getting to read new authors. And some of these are going to be part of series, which I'm dying to get my hands on. But highly recommend trying out any of these Australian authors if you're into romance. They were all fantastic. For the first episode of the Completion Chronicles, I did manage to complete 6 duologies. So the duologies I managed to complete were These Bonds That Unite Us by J.C. Balenka. This is the second book in her Primordial Covenant duet, which is a slightly dark Omegaverse with masked rock stars. Loved the queer normative world we had here. Loved that the boys really did have to grovel to get Omen's affections, which well deserved, because what they did and pushed her to do was frankly life-threatening, and I'm glad to see it. Then we had Immortality by Dana Schwartz, which is the second book in her Anatomy duology, and this follows a girl named Hazel Sinnott in the early 1800s, and she is training or wants to train to be a surgeon, and we're really taking a look at the culture at the time in Edinburgh and the rampant sexism, but also what the medical industry looked like at the time, and includes references to the body snatching epidemic that happened during that time. This is a wonderful companion to the first book and actually deals with the fallout and the reveals that we had, and I will say that I am forever team Simon, and I do not think she should have gone with Jack, but still I enjoyed my time. The way that Dana has been able to effortlessly craft what feels like an authentic 1800s is just perfect, and I am excited to read more from her, and I hope she does write more historical fiction because it was great. Then I did pick up The King of Libertines by Pam Goodwin. This is the prequel novella to Sea of Ruin, and it was a really good look at Bennett and Priest and how they were introduced to each other, because when we first meet them in Sea of Ruin, they have since been married and divorced. So good to see their meeting and how their relationship started off. Then I did binge read the Sweethearts duology by Marie McKay. This is one of the book series in her Poisonverse, Omegaverse series, which I'm excited to read more of the Poisonverse, and this is a dark bully Omegaverse. In this we're following Vex, who is an Omega, and I can't remember exactly, but I think she's got golden eyes, which means that she has kind of like rejected the societal norms, which puts her at risk, because Omegas with these golden eyes, while they do have some autonomy over their own body, they then do not have the freedoms that are given to other Omegas, so that they can like have just general protection from crimes and stuff. So she has snuck into a meet and greet with the Crimson Fury pack, who are a pack of alphas. I kind of think of them as like, you know, they'd all be the male leads in like an MCU movie, and discovers that they're scent matched. She posts about it online and then ends up being snatched by some baddies and sold, and is dark bonded, so she has a forced bond put on her, and she is sent to be a sweetheart who are normally like betas, who are given to packs to help soothe alpha energies and that kind of thing. So she is going in undercover in hopes of bringing the Crimson Pack down from the inside out. And if you like Lola King's Pack Darling, I think you will enjoy this brand of Omegaverse. I had a really fun time, and I picked this one up for a book club read for in my Omegaverse era book club, and also Marie McKay will be going to Babe, so I'm excited to have read her. I'm going to add in a cheeky pre-order so I can meet her in May. Then I picked up Freefall by Sarah Kate, which is the second book in the Wild Boys duology, and this is an MMF romance. This follows Nash, who is related to the characters in book 1. This is quite angsty and quite toxic. I did enjoy that towards the end of the book that everyone has kind of their own battles and demons that they're fighting, and manage to kind of reflect and get their shit together enough to have what seems to be a healthy triad relationship. But I love Sarah Kate. She does do a great MMF romance, so I'm excited to continue with the Salacious Players, because I know book 3 is an MMF, and yeah, it was hot, it was angsty, and I'm glad that I finally wrapped up this series. And last book that I read in that vlog was Tempted by My Roommate, which is by Jasmine Miller, and this is the second book in her Mitchell's Brothers series. This is like a sweet sweet small town friends to lovers romance, and I really enjoyed being back with these characters. It's the sequel to Baking with a Rockstar, and in this we have Monica, who is a dancer who has had an accident and is on recovery, and she ends up moving to the same town that her best friend from the first book has moved to and found the love of her life, and she ends up moving in with the hero from the first book's brother named Gabe, who is a fantasy author, and they end up together. It's very cute, very sweet, although I will say the spice does spice, and it just reminded me how much I enjoyed Madeline Miller's writing. Alright, so let's dive into the rest of the books that I read. So I started the year off with an absolute bang and picked up Sin by Kayla Rain and Meg Ann. This is the first book in their Make Games Apocalypse series, which I have a sinking feeling might be the last series in the overall Make Games, which makes me a little sad, but overall I absolutely devoured this one. So in this we are following Mary, who is a character we met in the Make Games Death. She is an incubus and is said to be the niece of Lilith, and she ends up being a real key player in the impending apocalypse, but if the good guys can get her on their side, and they may be able to stop Lucifer from taking over. So after the events of the Make Games Death, the four horsemen are now free and seeking retribution for their mistreatment. So whoever's running the apocalypse has really made some serious enemies, and they figure what better way to disrupt the balance of power than by joining the forces of good and then helping to stop the apocalypse. All they have to do is knock up Lucifer's vessel, who is the fated mother of the Antichrist. Enter Mary. Simple, right? So the four horsemen, which include Grimm, Sin, Chaos, and Mel, are assigned to protect Mary in hopes that some forced proximity situation will get the job done and they can knock her up. However, the horsemen aren't the greatest at sharing and don't really want to be ordered around and told what to do. And despite being a succubus, Mary has a vow of celibacy. So the horsemen will need to woo her in hopes of achieving their goal and saving the world. So obviously chaos ensues, and this was fantastic. It has their absolute brand of crazy, wild, paranormal with a heavy hit of spice and just rampant humor. I loved getting to know more about Mary. She's kind of had a pretty tough time with her powers, and due to some trauma decided not to partake in the physical act of intimacy, which is a bad thing for succubus because succubus need to have sex to feed. You know, that kind of sexual energy is what feeds them. So she ends up being a cam girl, and that is enough of a substitute for her to be able to stay alive. Then we have the horsemen, which is grumpiest and grumpier, and I love them. They are fantastic. So I will say I just love the way that Kayla Rain and Meg Ann have just pieced together the world, and they've kind of pinched and manipulated a bunch of different folklore and mythology elements to weave this together, and I'm just so obsessed with the mythos behind the horsemen. So we learn that Sin, who is famine, Mel, who is pestilence, are not the original horsemen for famine and pestilence, and it kind of gives the Dread Pirate Roberts vibes from The Princess Bride. It's just a mantle that gets passed on to whoever wants it or would be an embodiment for the horsemen. And Chaos, who is war, and Grimm, who is death, seem to be the original horsemen, or at least Chaos has been the horseman since antiquity. There's also a really interesting twist in particular with famine and pestilence. So famine is actually an incubus, and it's kind of defined by his insatiable hunger, which is a unique take on that idea of famine. And then pestilence has basically developed to create computer viruses alongside the standard plagues, which, a computer virus, depending on where the virus is happening and what information gets leaked, can be just as devastating as a illness. So really love that, and I'm excited to learn more about the horsemen as we move on. We also get some cameos from the other characters in the Make Games book via Operation Puffin, which our resident hermit and Puffin enthusiast Asher has been kind of putting a radio broadcast to try and collect the players in the previous apocalypse misses in hopes that they can also help and save the world. It is just this beautiful, funny interjection, and honestly it makes me want to reread the Make Games Pestilence because I love Remy and Asher so much. Did listen to this one audiobook, and it's my favorite way to consume this series. I do have a special edition set of all of them, but I will forever love these audiobooks. The narrators do an absolutely impeccable job of bringing these characters to life. Each character gets their own narrator, and I always get a kick out of the changes they make to the production. So with our Operation Puffin, the audio is slightly distorted as if it is being broadcast, and I just completely love it. I will ramble and ramble all about this series, but they've just created this fun, bonkers world. They've pulled together myths, legends, and they have created a wonderfully like sex positive, why choose, high spice paranormal romance, and I'm so excited to see how this series ends. I think Chaos is coming out in April, which is the second book, and I will most likely reread Sin, but this is basically my PSA to say if you haven't started the Mate Game series, you probably should get on that. And then I picked up If I Would Have Known by MK Vindictive. This is a quite angsty romance, which is a hockey player and rock star romance. So in this we're following Ophelia, who you would think has her life together. She is the lead singer of a very prominent rock band, lovingly dubbed the Taylor Swift of rock, and she is doing her best. However, when you take a look at it, you realize that her boyfriend is a piece of shit and really only seems to be with her for the connections she can bring to his own career. He runs an art gallery, and her mother is constantly belittling her. She is a plus size character, or I would at least say she's a curvy character, so her mother is constantly belittling her image, and even though she is one of the most successful musicians on the face of the goddamn earth, doesn't believe that she's put enough effort into her career. At the start of this book, things are starting to crumble. She has discovered that the slimebag boyfriend is cheating on her and ends up going home to her brother and her best friend, who's her brother's wife. She just needs time out from the limelight. She needs to recenter herself, and her best friend is pregnant and nearing the end of her pregnancy, so she is taking a little her time. Heal from the breakup with the people who love and support her the most. And she gets rejuvenated and heads back off to slay her demons and take on the world, and unfortunately weeks later she gets a phone call which changes her life, and this does deal with grief, and she then drops everything to be with her brother and her family to help go through that. I really enjoyed the exploration of grief in here. Ophelia herself seems to be pushing her grief to the side a lot just to make sure that her brother is supported, and there are these moments throughout where they're both kind of scared to have fun or make a joke or think back on like a fond memory in case that it would be disrespectful. So we have Rockstar, enter hockey player. Ophelia's brother is a hockey player, and Rook is the newest defenseman to join the Chicago Hellhounds, and he himself is dealing with a lot of trauma with his mum, and he has a garbage dad who was abusive, so he feels a lot of guilt over that because once he finally moved to college and signed his big NHL deal, his mother was attacked, and he holds a lot of grief towards that. So the pair of these people are kind of a little broken and instantly drawn together, but there's this unsure element to them because Ophelia is going to go back to her life and take on the world and be a rock star, and Rook has finally landed his own dream of being a hockey player. They don't really know how it's going to work moving forward, but I did love getting to see them support each other through their own grief, whether it be very new like Ophelia's or this kind of like deep-seated grief like Rook's, and I devoured it. This book had me sobbing. I was crying so many times, and I am dying for the next book in the series. This is another book that I got a review copy for, so thank you very much to MK Vindictive for sending a copy my way. You destroyed me, and I completely loved this. So if you're in the mood for an angsty romance which will rip your heart out, explores grief, but does pack in some excellent spicy scenes, I would highly recommend If I Would Have Known. And then I picked up Blood of Hercules by Jasmine Mass. This was a book that did appear up on the Goodreads Choice Awards for the fantasy romance category, but this cover really wasn't giving, and I was kind of like, eh. And then I found out it's a dark why choose romance with Greek myth, and I was like, say no more. I listened to this one in a day. I just couldn't stop listening to it, and it is dark. So we are following Alexis. This kind of gives post-apocalyptic world where the gods have essentially come back and things are in flux. Anyone with a drop of god's blood, so they're considered to be descendants of gods, are known as Spartans, and they step into the Colosseum, and if they survive the Colosseum battle, they are then sent to a war college sponsored by other Spartans and will kind of join the ranks of heroes. So Alexis Hurt really isn't a hero. She is just trying to keep her and her foster brother alive, and I loved their relationship. Even once they're separated, he is a massive driving force for her to survive. All she wants to do is get back to him and make sure she's okay. They are essentially living in poverty, and when I say living in poverty, they are like living in a cardboard box, and the only food they really get are from school. Alexis is a senior, I believe, in high school, and she tutors people for food rations. Alexis has decided to take this test in hopes that she can get a full ride to college and get a boring job but a stable job so she can support her and her brother and they can basically survive. At the end of this test, they are supposed to give a blood sample just to make sure that there's no Spartans in the mix, and Alexis is kind of like, sure, I mean, I guess, just take my blood, why not? And then is thoroughly surprised when she ends up being a Spartan and is whisked away to the War Academy. The Greek gods, or the houses of the Spartans, are split up into the Olympians, which is 8, including, you know, Zeus, Hera, Athena, Hermes, Poseidon, Demeter, Apollo, and Dionysus, and the Chthonic houses, which Hades, Ares, Artemis, and Aphrodite are there. There's a difference in their power. The Olympians kind of have a bit more like what you would typically expect, more like elemental, it's joyful, kind of can be dangerous, but nothing really, where your Chthonic houses have this kind of really dark, dangerous twist where you could like manipulate people and seriously hurt people. So Alexis is thrown into the Colosseum, has no fucking clue what's going on. And I should mention as well, this is very rambly, but she has a giant pet snake who's kind of adopted her, and I think the snake's called Nyx. Anyway, no one else can see her, but the snake is really what saves Alexis because she doesn't have any power. She doesn't know what's happening, and she then ends up getting assigned to gladiators Achilles and Patro, who are Chthonic gladiators, and it's been said that if their candidate survives, they will be given all the rights and privilege of the Olympian gladiators, and it goes from there. The War College is dark, like they have endless classes, it's cold all the time, they're going for like mammoth runs, they're not allowed to sleep, there's no food, and she's slowly losing her mind. And that's mildly funny because she's quite hilarious, and Nyx is there to support her. She ends up having a very bully, very enemies relationship with Achilles and Patro, who are also a couple, and then there are 2 other men who she meets along the way. And I completely devoured this. I'm dying for the second book, which is, I think, Bonds of Hercules. I will definitely reread this because this is just so much fun. It is a dark fantasy romance with a Greek twist spin, which has like kind of adult Percy Jackson vibes, and I completely adored this one. I cannot wait for the sequel, which depressingly is not coming out till like October, but very excited for it nonetheless. And then I read Dirty Truths, Shattered Dreams, and Beautiful Thorns by Jaime and Eve and Tate James. This is books 3 to 4 of their Boys of Bellerose series, which is a dark mafia rockstar romance. And obviously I read these all back to back, so I was completely captivated by what was happening with Billy and the guys, and just needed to know what was going on. There was endless cliffhangers. So this series follows Billy Bellerose, who's having a bit of a tough one. Growing up, she had 2 loves of her life, one of which was a aspiring rock star named Jace, and the other was Angelo, whose dad was a mafia boss. She ends up breaking Mr. Rockstar's heart so he can go off and live his dreams. He essentially then writes a hate album which sparks his band to fame. Also passive-aggressively names the band Bellerose so that she will have to think about him for the rest of her life, and promptly dumps Angelo, the mafia guy. It's been a couple of years and she's been on the run. Her parents were killed, seemingly for some kind of dirty deal, and she's basically living below the poverty line, working cash in hand jobs and moving whenever she feels she needs to. One night she gets a job to help out as a waitress from a girl in her share house, and things are going alright until Angelo rocks up with a bunch of his goons and shoots down the place. She then runs for her life, runs towards a club thinking that there's lots of people, that maybe the men with guns will not shoot her, and bumps into a beautiful tattooed man who offers to protect her. He's got a bit of a hero complex, and that man turns out to be the guitarist in Jace's band. She ends up on tour. She's trying to figure out what the Richis want from her. It is twisty, it is wild ride, it is hot, and I loved every second of it, so much so that I had to read the books back to back. So if you are in the mood for a dark Waichu's Rockstar meets Mafia romance, look no further than this series. It was fantastic. And then last but not least, for January, I read Secrets of Mine by Alexis Grace. This is the second book in her Of Mine series, and this book gives me all the Criminal Minds vibes that I love. We are following Freya, who is the daughter of a serial killer. Now she has escaped and has become a detective. From the events in the first book, she ends up being upgraded to FBI agent and is working with the serial crimes unit to track down her father. And I was not sure how this was going to live up to Killer of Mine because I just devoured that one, but I didn't need to worry. It truly did live up to the hype. The twists were twisting. I'm still in shock. My jaw is dropped and I am trying to really process what the hell happened. So it's a sequel, it's a romantic suspense. I'm not gonna like give you too many details, but it was fantastic. I loved getting to watch the dynamic between Freya, River, Ox, Judd, and Eli develop, especially in the developments of the case. And I'm basically just dying for the sequel. If you're a Criminal Minds girly like I am, please pick up this series. The Criminal Minds vibes are immaculate. You need to read this, and we can now all just wait very impatiently for the third book. Also, it has a Waichu's, which tick tick tick. Absolutely love all of that. Alright, moving on to February. There are a few books that I again won't mention because they are featured in episode 2 of the Completion Chronicles, which was my fantasy romance themed vlog. So I will leave that up below and up below. I will leave that in the cards and link down below if you'd like to hear my full thoughts on this one. But I did finish the Hades and Persephone saga by completing A Touch of Malice and A Touch of Chaos by Scarlett St. Clair. Caveat, I do know that there are spin-off books, or they're books in Hades' point of view. I may go back and reread it because I do love Scarlett St. Clair's take on mythology. It does give like slight Lore Olympus vibes. I think they're kind of stuck together in my head because they're both Hades and Persephone's retellings that came out around the same time and have an urban setting. I was a little worried going into this one because I hadn't read the first 2 books in like 4 years, but I think that Scarlett St. Clair did a fantastic job of like contextualizing where Persephone and Hades were at based on the events of the previous 2 books, that I didn't feel lost, and I really did love being back in this series. I also finished Feral Blood and Kings of Moonlight, which is books 2 and 3 in Eva Chase's Bound to the Fae, and finishes off the Wolves of Summer trilogy within this collection. These are Waichu's Fae fantasy romances which have wolf shifters, which I really thoroughly enjoyed, and I thought this was going to follow in the lines of Lana Perechek's The Fae Guardian series, but we had a massive cliffhanger in the Kings of Moonlight, which makes me want to continue. So this is a fantasy romance with a very slow burn Waichu's. Our main girlie has been building her harem as she goes, and this seemingly human girl trapped in the Fae world because it's discovered that the Seelie Fae, who are these wolf shifters, have lost control of their wolf side and have kind of gone a bit berserker, but her blood, they've discovered, is a way to help combat that. And so she had been caged, captured, locked up, and bled. She is then broken out and saved by a group of banished Seelie, and books 2 and 3 were really situated into the world, and we're diving into the dynamic and the war between the Seelie and the Unseelie, and I just had a really fun time. And based on that cliffhanger, I will be diving into the second trilogy, which I think is like the Ravens of Winter, because the Unseelie Fae are Raven shifters, and I think that is amazing. I finally made some progress in the Crowns of Nyaxia series and read 6 Scorched Roses and the Star-Cursed King. Can see now why this was super important to read before diving into Ashes and the Star-Cursed King, because the characters in here, Lilith and Vale, are hugely important to Rin and Araya's story and their political machinations which are happening after The Serpent and the Wings of Night. This novella is one of my favorite novellas, and I think really does show how you can get so much character development and relationship development in such a tiny book, and I love this. This really just reminded me how much I enjoy this series and this vampire fantasy romance which has been created. Ashes and the Star-Cursed King really perfectly continues Rhea and Rain's story. We have come out of the Kajari, which is this Hunger Games style tournament, and we're now kind of thrust into the political landscape, which is an absolute disaster at this point in time. They have enemies everywhere, and maybe they're still enemies themselves and have to figure out what's going on. And yeah, love this, and I'm excited to start the next duology in this, which follows a character we've come to know and love. I think the next one's the Bloodborne duet, which focuses on the House of Blood vampires, which I'm very excited. We learn a lot about them, and they may be kooky crazy, and I need to know more. Last book I won't mention is Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. What to say about this book? This is the third book in the Imperium series. Everyone knows what this is. This was one of the most anticipated releases this year, and I have so many questions. And the fourth book won't be coming out until next year, late next year, I think, so I will be definitely rereading this as we go forward. I really enjoyed the aspects we got of the wider world in here, and we've really got Violet and Xaden trying to rally the troops to fight the big bad, and yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a fun time. It had me hooked. This looked like 500 pages, and I read this in like 24 hours because I probably more along like 32 hours because I just couldn't put it down. I was absolutely enamored with this. All right, so for the other books that I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth with, I did reread The Scent of Us Part 1 by Ileana Lee, which is the first book in her Bond's Disillusion Omegaverse series, and this is her debut book and the first book I ever read of hers, and I completely loved this reread. I think I loved this more the second time I read it because I was so engaged the first time that I just flew through it, and I didn't really get time to really sit in Juno's story. So it's set in Australia, set in Melbourne, which I will always champion, and we are following Juno, who is an Omega and was forced into a bonding, and we're in this point in time where the medical professions have found a way to dissolve bonds, which was perfect, but they need trial participants, and Juno manages to escape the abusive place that she's in and ends up being a participant in this study and is able to break her bond with her alphas. We find her years later. She's trying to figure out who the hell she is and piece her life together. She's studying. She wants to be a graphic designer, and she meets a couple of her scent matched mates and has to figure out what she's going to do with her fear of alphas. And it was just a complete joy to be back in this world. I adore Ileana Lee's brand of Omegaverse, and yes, while she does do a sweet Omegaverse, given the history, what Juno's gone through, there is some dark moments, so please do check your trigger warnings. I just loved watching Juno slowly realize that the Rivera Gunnison pack are what alphas are meant to be, and they treat her the way she always should have been treated, and that they basically will do anything to care for her. And watching Juno slowly open up to them and realizing that these guys could be her safe place was absolutely magic. I did listen to this because I got a audio review, and I loved the audio. We have 2 Australian narrators, which really just help to cement the story in Melbourne, which again is a big tick for me, and I just got a kick out of having the accents and like references to places that I've been around the city. I don't know, I just loved it. So I highly recommend this Omegaverse if that is a subgenre that you're interested in, because this is like a fantastic example of what an Omegaverse story can be. I then picked up A Curse of Fate by Jamin Eve, which is the first book in her Shifter City Fated Mates. Now this does mention Omegas and Alphas, but Jamin Eve has come out and said that it is not an Omegaverse, and it's less Omegaverse what we know, like the ABO trope to be, has come from fanfiction and is more like set around that defamed study which had that wolves operate on like an alpha, beta, omega instance. But this was so much fun. This does have Jamin Eve's like signature humor, and it is wild and completely bonkers. Emmeline is an Omega, and in this world wolf shifters or any shifters are kind of out and about, and they kind of live in these cities, and the idea is that an Omega are considered precious and they would be protected by the city, and they're supposed to be given this kind of lap of luxury, but she knows it to be that she will essentially be sold off to a pack. This is all information she received from her mother, who was pretty shit and a bit abusive, and she ends up on the run. So she never stays in place for too long and will ensure that she is not captured by the council. The reason in particular, even though her mother was horrible, is that she saw what a pack did to her mother and how that slowly destroyed her and led to the cause of her death, and that's not a fate that she wants for herself. She has spent 10 years hiding from the other cities and the alphas who control them in terms to protect herself. However, her luck runs out and she bumps into an alpha in a human city, and she's dragged back to the Golden Claw against her will and is on trial. She's basically on trial. The council of alphas who run the city are going to decide her fate when she discovers that the strongest alpha is actually her scent match, and he claims her, and she is wanting to reject them in hopes that she can then keep on keeping on and then run away. And it was just so much fun. This is another book that I read and absolutely devoured. I am so excited to see what happens. The ending, I should know from Jamie and Eve that she loves to leave us on a cliffhanger. Thankfully the second book is out, so I'm going to pick that one up in March, but so much fun. Very interested to learn more about this world. Definitely more on the paranormal than the Omegaverse, but if any of that sounds like your jam, please pick it up. I understand that I'm a bit more rambly than normal, but please forgive me. Next, I picked up Bunny Season by Bindi Kennedy. I do have a physical copy of this book somewhere, but my apartment is a mess. I've got my bookcases and then there's just stacks of books in front of it. So it is here somewhere, but I'm not sure where. This is like a rom-com new adult college hockey romance, and it is so fun. I love Bindi Kennedy's writing. She is hilarious. And in this, we are following Lottie. She has Tourette's syndrome, which, yes, there are some moments and limited moments which does add to the comedic element to the story. However, I find that the comedy more comes from Lottie's anxiety, and we're in her head a lot, and her like wild thoughts. She's chaotic, she makes hilarious observations, and she's just awkward and relatable, and those kind of like embarrassing moments that you get when you're like overthinking and that kind of stuff. That's where I find that the comedy comes through. I think Bindi does a fantastic job of highlighting that Tourette's syndrome is more than just the strange movements and the weird vocalizations, that there is a lot more to it, and it is quite a isolating and a very chronically debilitating illness. Lottie, she switched her major in college and she is studying finance. She's got an internship at this company where no one really knows who she is. She's again that quite awkward, uncomfortable girl. She knows that her Tourette's syndrome puts people off, so she doesn't really have a good social ability. And the new receptionist at the firm decides to befriend her, and you know, they spark a quick friendship, and through that friendship she meets Noah, who is the captain of the hockey team at her college and is, you know, like the suave playboy, and he is instantly besotted with her. I loved watching their relationship dynamic unfold. They definitely go friends to lovers, and Lottie does have a lot of anxiety around what's going to happen, and she thinks that her and Noel will just have a fling before he's off to the NHL to get his, you know, big hockey dreams, where he is so captivated and fully locked in with her. He spends time, you know, researching her illness and making sure that he can care for her when she needs it, and I love these two together. It was just an absolute joy. There is some laugh out loud funny moments. This just had a lot of heart, and I am very much excited to pick up more of Bindi Kennedy's work. I think there's going to be a second book in this series, which looks like it will be MMF, so very excited for that one. I then picked up Kink in the Road by Evie Mitchell, which is a very short novella, which is part of a new series, and it is a small town romance. It's set on this like small island town where thruples seem to be the norm, just because there's less women than men. We're following Riley, who is a mechanic. She follows in her father's footsteps, but she's not really seen to be one of the girly girls. She's quite tall, doesn't necessarily live up to the feminine ideal of small and dainty. She's also a mechanic, so has quite a traditionally masculine job, so she's often seen either in her like work overalls, or she's really comfy in like jeans and t-shirts. So she just assumes that no one sees her as a woman, no one sees her femininity, and that she, despite really wanting to find a loving relationship, it's just not going to be something for her. And then she's having a particularly like sad girl day, which like relatable girl, and is at the pub, which is right by her rental, and ends up having a chat with her friends who own the bar. I think it's Finn and Aiden. One of them's the bartender and one of them is like the chef, and she has had a couple of drinks and lets out her feelings, and they kind of like, girl, we've been into you the entire time we've moved here. Let us be the ones to show you love. And yeah, it's their romance, and it's super cute. I love Evie Mitchell's writing, and I just love that these two men are proving to Riley that she is worth everything and worth all the effort, and it was so sweet. If she writes more novellas in this little series called Men of Trinity Bay, I'm definitely picking them up. And then I reread If We Ever Meet Again and If the Sun Never Sets by Anna Huang. This is the first two books in her If Love series, and they actually follow like a duet. I read this one back when it first came out. I got a review copy of it, and we're following Blake and Frera, who are on an exchange. Both of them are American students who are in exchange in Shanghai. Farah is a Chinese American, very arts focused. She wants to be an interior designer, and Blake is your American golden boy. He was the quarterback and captain of his football team. He had all the clubs wanting to sign him. However, something happens and he quits without telling anybody, and then signs up for this year-long exchange in Shanghai and really focuses in on his business major, and it is their unlikely relationship. She's definitely like the smart, shy girl, and he is obviously the athletic playboy jock. What I loved revisiting in the first book was just seeing these two being thrown together in this unlikely scenario and finding out who they are outside those cliches and tropes, and that we should never hang out together because you're a nerd and I'm a jock kind of thing. And the way that he is able to make her feel comfortable in the idea of relationship and sex was great. I think that was really fantastically written. And then on the flip side, she is able to make him believe in himself. His dad has really belittled him and said that he's nothing, all he's good for is football and he'll never amount for anything, and now that he's given up football, like what good is he? Where she really does support his dreams of opening up a bar and sees that he is worth more than that. So that was beautiful. The events in this book did break me again, and they don't end up very well. We end up in book 2 where it's years later and they are reunited. This was written before Twisted Love, so it was really interesting to see because I feel like there are some things that happen, especially in If the Sun Never Sets, that kind of echo what would be put into Twisted Love. This is not a dark romance, it's contemporary romance, and yeah, we meet them years later and they are thrown back together. She is working her dream job and he has opened up his bar, and she's been hired to renovate his new apartment, and they get the chance to figure out what the hell happened and what broke them up, and then see if they have the ability to move past that, and if they are in the right place as grown up, because I think they're in their mid to late 20s at this stage, and if they can make it work. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm excited to get into the rest of the series. And then I picked up Prisoners of Silk by Lydia Foxglove, and oh my god, this was just beautiful. I know Maggie from Maggie's Books and Stuff had been talking about it, but the way that Lydia Foxglove was able to meld together a Sleeping Beauty retelling with Fae Courts and Marie Antoinette's story was just beautiful. It still felt like its own thing, and I think the glitz and the glamour of the Fae Courts really fits with Marie Antoinette and the Sun King's court. So we're following Princess Marie Rose, who was born in the human realm, and a fairy witch laid a curse upon her that she would prick her finger at a spindle at the age of 16 and fall into a long sleep. Her parents did not want that to happen, so outlawed the haberdashery industry and any tailors and anything like that to ensure that she will survive past her 16th birthday. They've also basically handicapped their entire kingdom because they're now reliant on everyone else and trades and imports for, clothing and any textiles. Her 16th birthday's come and gone. However, she's not doing well. She's the only princess, and princess's sole role in medieval societies is to be married. But no one wants to marry the cursed princess because her mother has been putting the terms and conditions of the arranged marriage that you have to get rid of spindles, and the other kingdoms are like, you're crazy, we're not. That's not going to happen. However, she then ends up getting an unusual offer which comes from the handsome reserved prince of the Fae of the Sun Palace. However, there's no privacy within the palace. The royal family all has a set role to play, which the people look up to. With this world, the Fae kind of had rival clans, and they'd since united, and as a way to keep that unity is that the roles that were placed upon the original uniting family have then just been passed down. So while Marie is going to be protected from spindles at all costs, her entire life is going to be ruled and put on display for the people. Augustus is our sun prince, and I think he is the sweetest. He is a little bit bookish and a little bit nerdy, which his grandfather, who's the king, doesn't like. He admires Marie's like feistiness and spirit. However, she kind of pushes the boundaries in terms of what her role is supposed to be, which then puts his own image and standing in the court in jeopardy, because it's this whole like element that she is supposed to be subservient to him, and that when she starts doing stuff, it makes him look bad. So it puts a little bit of pressure on their relationship. Anyway, I just think it was fantastic. I am excited to see how this is going to move forward. I'm not envisioning a happily ever after, but maybe we'll get a happy ever after for Augustus and Marie. We've got the political intrigue of the courts. We'll be interested to see if the Sleeping Beauty elements pop in again, and revolution seems to be brewing, so I'm excited to continue with this. Loved her writing style. I got such a kick out of like pointing out all the nods of the reference material, but it still manages to feel like wholly unique, which is fantastic. And next I read The Little Shop of Grand Curiosities by Iris Lake, and this just felt like the warm, cozy fantasy romantasy that I've been looking for. This gives me the cozy vibes of Howl's Moving Castle and The Princess Bride, and I devoured it. So we're following Nefel, who runs a curiosity shop in Allura, which is I think the southern kingdom, and it is the last shop because the dreadful mundane has run into town, which means that people have lost their curiosity, so no one's really visiting the curiosity shop. This shop is magical. It has a bookcase which will just give you the book you ask for. There are potions and little charms everywhere, and it talks to her. There's a bubbling cauldron that like makes comments to her, and I just love it. Things are struggling, but she is so strong-willed and determined to keep the store afloat that she is willing to do whatever. Enter Apollo, who is a charming, mysterious traveler from the other side of the world, and it really spells all kinds of trouble for Nefel. And for the first time in life, she is taken from her shop, taken from her small town, and is thrust into the wider world. All the adventures she read about in her books, she is now seeing unfold in real life. And the two end up in this forced proximity moment, and it kind of also gives me Stardust vibes in the fact that they're on an adventure. Nefel has got some kind of magic. She ingested stardust when she was little, which is what keeps the cauldron and the magic shop alive. And Apollo, after having his heart completely broken, has given up his heart to a witch. So he is pushing people away because he doesn't want to hurt them because he's heartless, and he's also trying to find his heart. So that's where it kind of gives me like the Stardust meets Howl's Moving Castle vibes, and it's just so sweet. I love the pair of them so much. We have moments where like Apollo, he kind of becomes a bit self-aware that he knows he's being a shitty person, but because he has no heart, he can't really stop it. And then Nefel is this like quietly anxious person who doesn't know what the hell is going on, is so curious and wants to like explore everything, but is scared of getting hurt. And I love this one. It had, again, all the whimsical, magical vibes of every cozy fantasy that I completely love and adore. The second book is coming out in May, so if you like your fantasy romance on the cozy side every now and again, highly recommend picking up this one. It was pure magic. And then last but not least, I rounded out February by reading Psycho Shifters by Jasmine Mass. We know that I was obsessed with the Bonds of Hercules at the start of the year. When Hannah from Hannah Blackwell mentioned that the Psycho Shifters series is another like why choose bonkers paranormal romance time, I knew I had to pick this one up, and she's right, it is wild bonkers, and I had a fantastic time. Kind of a similar setup, we have Sadie and her sister Lucinda, who are orphans. They were abandoned at this beta named Dick's Tavern. He is an absolute raging dick, no pun intended. Or maybe pun intended. We should ask Jasmine Mass if the pun was fully intended. They've showed up on his doorstep and he's, for whatever reason, decided to take them in. He seems to like Lucinda enough, but whatever goddamn reason, has been beating the crap out of Sadie since the dawn of time, to the point where she's kind of like lost her voice and she's covered in scars. In this shifter realm, there's not enough alpha, betas, and omegas to continue, and they're in this endless war with the fairy queen. She keeps sending monsters through the portal, so they need alphas in particular to fight the good fight, and betas to like help back them up, but omegas they need in particular because they are the people that will breed more alphas, betas, omegas. Historically, only the kind of nobility would be tested, but they're getting pretty desperate, so everybody is now getting tested on their 20th birthdays. So she gets taken from the tavern and she is taken to this sacred lake where, depending on what happens, it will depend on whether you're an alpha, beta, and omega. It turns out she is a female alpha, and that has never happened before in history, and she is whisked away way to one of the portals, the deadliest portal, and thrown into training. She ends up there with 3 other alphas who have to train her. Very confused by her because she seems to not have the ability to run. Every time she has to run, she is just fucking miserable, which, like, same girl, I hate cardio. But she has this voice in the back of her head, which she calls the Num, which clicks on and she becomes like this super soldier and this super fighter. We have Jax, who is this massively tall. He's like supposed to be like 7 feet tall, beautiful alpha. He is the overall leader of this particular military fort. He's quite calm and powerful, and he turns into a bear shifter. Then we have Asher, who is this like young, hot-headed man who kind of turns into the devil goat and seems to have an affinity for fire, which will be interesting to see how that plays out. And then we have Cobra, who is this like unhinged psychopath. Asher is psycho, but like Cobra is next level, and he is covered in jewels. Like, he's got like diamonds and emeralds kind of embedded into his skin. And when he switches into his alpha form, he has like these shadow snakes. It was just a wild, fun time. I was literally on the edge of my seat the whole time. Jasmine Mass has this comedy that runs through, and I love it. It's probably a little bit less dark than Bonds of Hercules, but if you are looking to try Jasmine Mass's writing style, I'd recommend this series only because she has such bingeable and then horrifically like cliffhanger endings that you want to pick up the second book. But the second book for the Spartan series isn't out, where you can read all 6 books in this full shifterverse. So yeah, highly recommend. All right, I actually think I got through that in a relatively reasonable amount of time. I'm not sure how coherent it was. Just know that I did love all these books. Comment down below and let me know what your most recent 5-star read is, or you can leave me a brain. Do we have a brain emoji? Yes, or you can leave me the brain emoji, because why not? Let's celebrate this beautiful cover. Linked in the description box below will be links to all these books, reviews if I have them, along with links to my social media channels. If you'd like to see more content from me, please like and subscribe. I'll be attempting to post new videos every Sunday. Anyway, that is all from me today, guys. I hope you're doing all kinds of well, and I will speak to you soon. See ya!